They did not call themselves Jews, nor did they know the word. But he was impressed by the ancient rituals they practiced, the powerful prayer they remembered and used for all occasions, the Shema Israel, which had kept them together. As legend goes, he asked the women to prepare a feast for him from the bounty of the Arabians.
Welcome, gentle listener. The silk routes of Afro-Eurasia, where mariners of many lands sailed long distances, centuries before the European age of so-called exploration. Ancient shipwrecks, forgotten peoples, lost tribes of Israel, kings. If this sort of thing piques your interest, if you're a bit of a history nerd as I am, you might be interested in my guest today, the poet Zilka Joseph. Her writing often touches on history and also how history and spirituality intersect. So there will be some reference to one of the infancy gospels, this sort of non-canonical writing by early Christians that's kind of rejected today about, the miracles Jesus performed when he was a young boy. She will also touch on the Portuguese Inquisition. My ideas about the Inquisition formed as a child, probably, first with something as silly as Monty Python, and then maybe Edgar Allan Poe and The Pit and the Pendulum, and these ideas just kind of congealed in my brain as far as what I thought the Inquisition might be, as maybe a very European, backwards-looking form of intolerance. I didn't consider, one, that Portugal would have similar ideas to Spain in this regard, and then also that both countries had world empires and colonial holdings in various continents, so that it could be seen in more of a global context and have influence as far away as places like India. Oh, and food as well. We have the intersection of not only history and spirituality, but cuisine too. Poets can do these things. When people think of India, they probably think of Hinduism, maybe Buddhism or Sikhism or Islam. But you may not be aware there is a centuries-old Jewish tradition in India. Zilka Joseph is a member of the Bene Israel community, which has existed in India for many, many years. So old that it's hard to say exactly how old it is, but probably in the thousands of years. And she'll, of course, be able to talk about it better than I could. She is an accomplished writer. I'll just mention a few of her accolades. She's published 6 collections of poetry. Her work has appeared in Poetry Magazine, the Kenyan Review, Asia Literary Review, Bombay Literary Magazine. She's been interviewed by NPR. She's been awarded a Zell Fellowship and the Michael Gutterman Prize. Her book, Sparrows and Dust, won a notable Best Indie Book Award, and she's going to share the title poem with us on this podcast. Let's listen to her read.
Sparrows and Dust. An epigraph from Rethke's Praise to the End reads, I believe in the sparrow, happy on gravel. The first time I noticed a cloud of dust rise from the playground, I squinted my 6-year-old eyes and saw sparrows flailing about in gravelly dirt. My mother told me, look, they're having their daily dust bath. See how well they wash themselves. Such a cleansing. Dust with dust. letting what's broken, biting, or dead flake off. I have always loved house sparrows, even when they drove us mad with their noisy fights and ferocious nesting inside our second floor Kolkata flat. Raining dirt, twigs, eggs, and just born chicks on us when rival pairs fought for territory on top of cupboards, chinks in clutter and junk stored everywhere. Our house was heaven and a kind of hell. Sometimes, when streaking in from the hot sun, one would fly into the fan's spinning blades. With a soft gasp, it would die at my feet. Sometimes, how it struggled, poor thing. I would cradle its head as blood seeped into my hand, give it water, whisper comfort. Often, when I shut its eyelids, a vision of my own feathered body lying lifeless below would flash by. I hovered above, as if I have been somewhere else. Weeping, I willed them. Come back from the dead. Failed shaman, I never saved anyone or anything. My parents, the animals and birds we loved, the locked flat falling to ruin. Now, years later, in short Michigan summers, I look for flusters of dust, feel a warmth thrill in my aching bones when I see these birds squirm in soil, then spring from a cloud, fluffing, cheeping, cleansed, whole. I think of the little known tale I read about the precocious 5-year-old trickster Jesus who played by the river one Shabbat evening and who shaped 12 sparrows from wet clay. When his father scolded that he had violated the holy day, he clapped, shouting to the birds, "Remember me, you who are now alive." And the living sparrows rose and flew away. All right, so now I'm going to read from Sweet Malida, and the poem is The Angels of Konkan. The Angels of Konkan. Naugaon, Maharashtra is where it is believed the ancestors of the Bene Israel were shipwrecked and where a ruined cemetery exists today. From tumbled sands and shattered bark, blurred shadows dragged us. Where were we? They dried our battered bodies, bound our wounds, clothed us in woven cotton, fed us warm food with their hands that we could not name then. And as Elijah ate of bread and flesh the ravens gave him, so also we ate and drank of the cool water brought from brooks. Who were these healers? Then, in fields of grass near the sea, we buried our dead, the ones we found. Where are they now? Set gravestones to remember. They let us pray as we wished, and giving thanks to Adonai, learn the craft of oil pressers. Or did our tribe know it already? We ate what our laws permitted, and praising this vast green land, its rich soil, its rivers, its ghats, its grains, its fish and fowl, we blessed the hearts and the living hands of the villagers who saved us. Choral Sonnet. We knew the Shema, kept Shabbat, diet rules, performed circumcisions on our sons, observed Passover. We lived in our own world, thrived. Christians discovered us. Later, they taught us Hebrew, translated holy books to Marathi, educated us, but could not convert us. Lost tribes, folks said, some laughed, impure. Even among us, we separated dark from fair. From Kochi came Rahabi, who sent us 3 scholars. Torah, rituals, rules we absorbed daily. Did we need anything to define us? Let the world scoff at the Kohanim gene found in our blood. We always knew the truth. And this is the last one, Deva. Not one fish. Not one fish. David Rahabi is a central figure in so many stories, including one saying that he came in 1000 CE. He may have actually been David Ezekiel Rahabi, 1694 to 1772, from Cochin on the Malabar coast south of Konkan, who helped revive Judaism among the Bene Israel. So David Rahabi of Malabar traveled north up the west coast and encountered the Shanwar Telis, who had taken the names of the villages for their own. He wondered at the oil pressers and farmers and others who made a living by rural professions, these women and men who had lived as a caste among the locals. So long unknown, this mysterious community, so apart from the urban world. They did not call themselves Jews, nor did they know the word. But he was impressed by the ancient rituals they practiced, the powerful prayer they remembered and used for all occasions, the Shema Israel, which had kept them together. As legend goes, he asked the women to prepare a feast for him from the bounty of the Arabian Sea. Would they pick crab and shrimp, mussel, clam, or bottom feeders? No, no, not one fish, not one fish without fins and scales had they chosen. Not one fish without fins or scales was served. They brought him white-fleshed fish like paplet and oily fish like bangra and tarli, fresh and flavorful and salty as the waters that brought the Ben Israel hence from the land of Solomon and David. He knew then they kept kosher, a word they did not recall, just kept a simple faith in the God of Abraham.
My interview with Zilka Joseph took place at the Asia Pacific Writers and Translators Conference late last year. The venue, Chiang Mai University, just happens to be under a flight path as well, so there are a few planes landing and taking off.
So I was born in India, born in Mumbai, moved to Calcutta, grew up there, and in the 90s moved to the US. I was always an English teacher, always interested in literature and mythology, so a lot of my work reflects that. And I began writing more seriously in roughly 2000 when I moved to Michigan, the US. And I began publishing my work and doing workshops, and also began teaching workshops because I did have a background in literature. And soon after becoming published, and I wanted to study an MFA, do an MFA, Master of Fine Arts, because I did not have a degree in the US, and so I could not teach. So, and also this would have been a wonderful way to explore more contemporary American literature. And I was very fortunate to be accepted into the program at the University of Michigan, the Zell Writers Program. I got a Zell Fellowship, which took care of a full 2 years of study at the university. And I was also awarded a scholarship from the Center of Education for Women, who supports women who come back to um, academic study after a long break in their lives. So very, very fortunate to have received that and been able to study. And from then on, I worked at the university for about 3 years. And of course, I was publishing all that time. So I had my very first book, Lands I Live In, was in 2007. That was before I got into the university. The next one was 2011, called What Dread. 2016 was from Wayne State University Press, Sharp Blue Search of Flame. And then my two pandemic books, In Our Beautiful Bones and Sparrows and Dust. And now my sixth collection, Sweet Malida. And I teach workshops and I coach individuals, and I also work on help people with their manuscripts, writers with their manuscripts, both in poetry and prose, and fiction, nonfiction, and that's my major source of income. And of course,
you seem very busy. How do you find the time to write?
um, if you're an independent editor and writer like myself, work comes and goes. You know, you have very fallow periods of work and writing both. So I saw it sort of works itself out. And I take very long to put a book together. I'm not a fast writer either, but I am, when I write poetry, I often have folders of poems that I'm working on. And then when I have enough material, I start looking at it and saying, how is it going to work as a book? And then I get ideas. And if I have, for example, Sweet Malida came together because I had a whole lot of poems, food poems, Bene Israel food poems, published in this wonderful journal called Rasa, which is a imprint of Whetstone magazine, which is a huge food journal. And that was like a huge inspiration for me. And then I began pulling, because I realized how much context some of these stories would need. And that's how and of course this was my history, and then I began to draw it in and create this new book.
So that's kind of what I want to ask you next.
Yeah, sure.
About this old Jewish community that's in India. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So the Bene Israel community is considered the oldest Jewish community in India. One of the theories is that there were these ships. There was always trade between Middle East and the Far East, Southeast Asia and the Far East. I think way before even people had recorded it, you know. So there was these boats that would come to do trade with India, and obviously these two ships that were shipwrecked on the west coast of India. The date that is being given for that shipwreck is 175 BCE. So that would mean that my ancestors came to India 2,000 years ago. And that takes you, you know, you have to take a gasp, but like 2,000 years, okay. That's how long this Jewish community has existed in India, till they were discovered in the 15th and 16th century by the missionaries. So there are other theories that they perhaps arrived with the destruction of the second temple in Jerusalem, and then much later in Solomon's times, because he had a huge fleet of ships that did travel the world. So it could have been one of those, and it could have been one of the lost tribes that worked his ships that possibly could have been my ancestors. So there are various theories, but a lot of the historians posit that it's more likely that my ancestors came from the Middle East and Persia, perhaps even Yemen, in the 5th and 6th centuries. But when you look at the date 175 BCE and how this community became so much part of the Indian villages and the fabric of India, it really makes you think that they didn't arrive this early. They must have come centuries ago. And if the cemetery existed that nobody knows about, that is connected to the origin story, there must be something more to it, you know. So the Bene Israel consider that their cemetery. And there is a post of memory, a memorial post to the ancestors who arrived in Navgaon. So even if it's myth, it's now become part of our history, and which is what I use in the storytelling in my book.
Yeah. So many questions, but I want to try and keep it related to your
Absolutely.
poetry. Could you, or like what you were talking about before with food?
Sure. So sweet malida. Malida is a dish that is just flattened rice, which you rehydrate, and fruits and nuts and dates and cardamom. And there's also a ceremony for Prophet Elijah, which uses the Malida, and that's called the Malida ceremony. So there are two things going on with Malida. And because a lot of the foods that we've adapted are from Maharashtra, from the Bombay area. But what's interesting is that we followed the dietary laws. So a lot of the foods that might have had dairy was replaced by coconut and coconut milk. So that's what some of those why those foods are special. And so in my book, Sweet Malida, I have a number of food poems where I talk about a certain kind of halwa, I talk about a certain kind of green curry, which is very special, and I talk about these wonderful fried sweet pastries called chironji and puris. So if you're hungry, I think this book would please you. And how these foods are sort of adapted to our ways and are used for our festivals. But I'd like to say a little more about Malida itself, because among the Muslims, among the Parsis, among the Hindus, they all have versions of Malida. So it's obvious that this was also taken from these cultures. And that's why in my poem I say Hindus, Muslims, Christians, we are quite integrated. Because we all live together in these neighborhoods. But obviously these roots of all these foods are from the West Coast. And so Malida became very special to the Bene Israel because they also connected it with the festival of, it's not a festival, it's a Thanksgiving ceremony to Prophet Elijah. They hold Prophet Elijah very dear. And there's a particular place in Maharashtra where his chariot is supposed to have landed and left a mark in the rock. So they pay pilgrimage there and they make this Malida there, and they call it a Malida ceremony. So there are a lot of little interconnections with history and mythology and food.
And I think maybe one of your poems dealt with like Jewish authorities coming to maybe inspect or check out this community.
Yes, that was the poem. Yes. So the poem that I read called Not One Fish refers to the Jewish community of Cochin, who I think in the 800s, one of the first, they came in several waves, but the origins are Portuguese and Spanish. So they were the Jewish community in Goa, which is a Portuguese colony. And during the Inquisition and, of course, the imposition of laws, many were chased out of Goa. So they came in waves, and then more waves directly from Spain and Portugal all moved down. So the origins are Sephardic of the Cochini Jewish community, as well as African and Middle Eastern, because they had slaves, they had household members who were of those communities. So we have a mix there. But the person I'm talking about, David Rahabi, he is a mythological figure as well as a real historic figure. And that's what's interesting of how the Bene Israel sing about him, that he came up to discover who these people. I mean, he heard about them, but he's like, we need to find out who these people are. And because of these tests and the way they lived, and the way they kept to the Shema and their some of the rituals, they had forgotten everything else. So they were identified just by these 5 or 6 things that they had kept to. And he realized that yes, these people are definitely of Jewish origin. And then he goes back. In fact, he takes some people back to be educated again and taught Judaism from scratch. So they learn the Torah and they become scholars, and many of them come back to the community, and then it's a revival of Judaism for that community. So that's another milestone which is referred to in Not One Fish. So that began their sort of coming back to the religion after having just held on to this handful of rituals and the Shabbat and Passover. And that's what identified them as different from the villagers. So many milestones of stories.
Yeah.
And of course the Christian missionaries who came actually helped in their education, because they translated the Bible into Marathi. And they studied the Bible and realized who they were and where they came from, and became very proud of who they were. So when they they wanted to try and convert them, they were very staunch in their belief in the Old Testament. And so that becomes another very interesting layer to the story.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to ask a few questions about sparrows and dust.
Absolutely.
I love this imagery of dust being a cleansing thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious how you came to that.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, even as a child, when you watch birds and their bird behavior, and me and my family and me and myself, we've always been interested in nature and birds and wildlife. So even the simplest humble sparrow becomes something that's so very interesting and so intrinsic to our lives, because they're in our homes. They're nesting in our homes and dropping eggs and birds and babies on our heads, fledglings. So I think just that observation that my mother made and pointed out to me, and the fact that it's a dust bath is so fascinating, when you watch. So I think that's the image that stuck in my head when I began to write about the sparrows. And then this absolute interesting image of something that we call dirt or dirty becoming something that's cleansing, that an element like dust can actually prevent, cleanse you, prevent bacteria and parasites on your body, because that's part of what they do, and it coats your feathers, and so these parasites can't get in. So I think that image really stuck in my head, that dust could be cleansing. And I think that's the metaphor that ran through the entire poem, of how something so, both are lowly, sparrows are lowly, and have their own sort of mythology through the Bible and history, and dust itself, because we say, when we bury somebody, we say ashes to ashes and dust to dust. And then
we're like sparrows in that poem, right?
Absolutely. And the turn comes when I'm looking at this dead sparrow, but then I too am hovering above, looking at the dead, where I am unable to bring my parents back to life, or these dead sparrows back to life. So there is that reversal, there's a shift in perspective and an out-of-body experience that becomes part of the story in this poem.
And then, Jesus as a child
Yes.
appears. I wondered, is that... I've heard there's some non-canonical gospels.
There are plenty. There are plenty.
It talks about what Jesus did.
Absolutely.
And,
yes, yes. And many of them, I think, are called part of the Apocrypha. They're the stuff that most Christians are not allowed to read if you're, a very religious or traditional. And this particular one comes from the Gospel of St. Thomas. And in my book, I have the references at the back, where to find it. And this exactly what you said, the stories of Jesus as a child, the power he had and he didn't know. So sometimes he would misuse it and had to be like, his parents had to sort of pull him back. And this particular story of the clay, as he was playing on the banks of the river, he had fashioned these sparrows. And that story also stuck and became part of this whole complex sort of fabric of this poem, where his father finds him, instead of following the Sabbath, and keeping, don't do anything, don't play, don't do any action. Here he was, this little boy, making little sparrows out of dust, out of mud, and his father scolding him. And then he says, the sense of that, that's why I use the word trickster, because in many of these stories he's seen as a trickster. And it's so interesting because all mythologies have a trickster figure of some kind. So if it's a Native American, we have the coyote, we have the tiger, we have
subversive.
It does, absolutely. And that's what interested me about this, because it makes him so human. But at the same time, he's like a magician. And that ties in with the image of the failed shaman that I was sort of like, how can I bring these people who are lost to me back? And so the subversiveness comes in, but in a way that is both makes him human and makes him this sort of magician that can breathe life into dust, because that's what Adam was. Adam and Eve were. But here we're talking about these mud sparrows, and 12 mud sparrows. So then we have the 12 apostles. So it all ties in with such beautiful symbolism. And that story that stuck in my head. And there are many, many stories in the Gospel of St. Thomas which are absolutely fascinating. And this one sort of just came to me, because when you start a poem like this, you always worried how to end it. But this image of the 12 sparrows just were very organic. And so I do have a note about it at the end of my book, The Gospel of St. Thomas.
So I want to ask either maybe what is most rewarding, or what is something rewarding about being a writer?
I think the reward comes from the fact that you're creating something, that you're trying very hard to create something beautiful, whether it's with ideas, words, images. And I think what people sometimes forget is how much craft goes into creating a poem. So even though I might have the raw material, the actual making, I'm very, I teach a lot about the making of a poem. It's not just the writing of the poem, but it's the whole process of shifting things, moving things, omitting things, adding things to create a work of beauty. And I think to me that's the ultimate sense of joy and fulfillment. The rest of it, being published and having books out, creates another layer of joy when that happens, because having somebody appreciate that work of art that you've worked so hard at, and somebody be touched or moved or sense the beauty that you have tried to create, is also a great pleasure, But it's the actual process, and having that work of art, whether it's a poem or a book of poems, gives me great joy. And also the joy of helping my students create a work of art and a book of art.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Deva. This is such a pleasure.
The Fearless Reader podcast is a creation of the Spittoon Arts Collective, a 100% volunteer-run organization. Our music is courtesy of Macondo. Until next time.